So, if you've ever thought about buying real estate in Ottawa, there's a pretty good chance you've also thought about buying real estate in Gatineau, just across the bridge in Quebec. And it makes sense. Ottawa and Gatineau geographically are super close together. It only takes about 10 minutes to get from downtown Ottawa into Gatineau, depending on traffic. It can take much longer than that, depending on when you're going or if the parkway is closed for bike days. That's a Gatineau inside joke for you. But despite the geographic proximity of Ottawa and Gatineau to each other, they're actually very different places with very different cultures, run by very different provinces with very different experiences as far as healthcare, education, infrastructure, all that stuff. So today I'm going to go through the top 5 things that I think you should be aware of if you're trying to decide between buying in Ottawa and buying in Gatineau. If you find anything of value in this video, please consider liking, subscribing so the YouTube algorithm knows to send it to more people just like yourself. With that being said, let's get on to point number 1. Now, the first consideration, and the one that motivates a lot of people to make the decision to go from Ottawa into Gatineau, is the price of the real estate there. And there's no question this is a compelling reason. If you look at the stats from June 2025, just last month, the average price in Gatineau is 30% less than the average price in Ottawa. And if you were to plug those average prices into a mortgage calculator, like I did, with a 25% amortization, a 4.5% mortgage rate, and a minimum down payment, you would be looking at $1,100 more per month to live in the average Ottawa home than to live in the average Gatineau home. That's a significant amount of money, and that really changes your lifestyle. It can also mean the difference between qualifying for an apartment condo or a freehold townhouse in Gatineau. This is a really compelling reason to move to Gatineau, and it's a big reason a lot of people make this decision, and it's a valid one if you can live in the kind of house that you always pictured yourself in rather than something that doesn't quite meet your expectations. With that being said, there are a couple other things you'll want to keep in mind. If the biggest draw of moving to Gatineau is the cheaper real estate prices, the biggest thing that might be keeping you away and something that you'll want to consider for sure is the higher taxes. The marginal tax rates at the provincial level are much, much higher in Gatineau. You do get a bit of a break on the federal taxes, but it's not enough to offset the cost of the increased provincial tax costs. Here's a quick example of a hypothetical taxpayer who makes exactly $80,000 a year. Let's compare what he pays in taxes in Ottawa versus what he's going to pay in taxes in Gatineau. You can go through the numbers here on your own. You can see there's a bit of a tax abatement at the federal level, like I was talking about. But in provincial tax, in Ottawa, he would pay about $4,500, and in Gatineau in provincial tax, he would pay about $9,937, so almost $10,000. And if we're to jump to the bottom and look at the effective tax rate and the take-home pay, we can see that this taxpayer is paying more than 5% more in tax at the end of the day, and he's going to take home about $4,500 less because of the taxes that he's paying in Gatineau. And this is based on someone who's only getting taxed on the lowest 2 brackets. You can rest assured that those tax brackets get higher the higher up you get on the income scale in Quebec. Now, as far as what those extra taxes get you, it depends on your stage of life. For some people, it does feel like a decent trade-off. For example, if you are a young family or you have young kids, the childcare is much more reliable and much cheaper on the Gatineau side, although that has recently improved on the Ontario side as well with the cheaper daycare. The maternity leave benefits are also really good compared to what you get on the Ontario side. But there are some things where it feels like you're paying higher taxes for lower services. I've found the administration on the Gatineau side is big enough that you can usually get somebody on the phone almost right away. But when it comes to the really important things like getting a family doctor, an emergency room wait, or driving your car down a road that doesn't just destroy the bottom of your car with potholes, I'm looking at you, Boulevard de Lucerne. And it can be really frustrating to feel like you're paying that higher tax rate while the emergency room waits are longer and the roads are inferior to a lot of the roads on the Ottawa side. This is a generalization. There's a lot of well-maintained roads on the Gatineau side as well, but I've found overall the Ontario side is a little bit better in that regard. The third thing to keep in mind when you're considering Ottawa versus Gatineau is the public transportation. Now, OC Transpo in Ottawa has caught a lot of crap over the last few years, rightly so, for the delays and cost overruns for the light rail. But at the end of the day, the light rail is getting done. At this point, we have the Confederation line running from Tunney's Pasture all the way out to Blair Road in the East End, with the East End extension out to Orleans only a couple months away from being completed. I'm making this video in July of 2025, so we'll see in the next couple months if I'm right or if there's another delay. But regardless, it should be done in less than a year for sure. They're also extending that same Confederation line out to the West End, all the way out to Moody Drive. Running north-south, there's also the Trillium Line, running from the middle of the Confederation Line down now all the way to pretty much Riverside South, and there's also a quick outlet to get to the airport along that line as well. So having that in place really does upgrade the public transit in Ottawa, especially when it's running reliably. We're still working on getting them running reliably throughout the winter. Why they didn't consider that when they designed it, I don't know, but that's neither here nor there. And despite some recent unpopular decisions to reduce the volume and change around some of the bus routes because of the rail that's incoming, the bus service itself is pretty reliable, with about a 99% rate of buses showing up on time, according to their website, so take that with a grain of salt. There was a bit of a dip in that number this past winter. I guess there were some staffing issues at OC Transpo, but they have apparently been fixed. On the Gatineau side, you'll be relying on the STO bus service. It's pretty good for getting around Gatineau. The service in the main part of Gatineau and in Hull is pretty decent, but if you're looking on the western edge of Quebec, in like the Elmer area, people who live in Elmer would not want me saying that they're part of Gatineau, but technically that is the case, and it's where a lot of people from the Ottawa side do end up moving to if they do go to Gatineau. Just keep in mind the bus service there is pretty unreliable. It's gotten better over the last couple of years, but it's not great. Something that's actually really nice about the transit system in Ottawa and Gatineau is that they're very integrated. So the Ottawa bus pass will allow you to move around freely using the STO buses in Gatineau, and an STO pass will allow you to do the same on the Ottawa side. So you don't have to worry about managing transfers and that sort of thing. It's pretty seamless at this point. Something else you'll probably want to keep in mind if you're considering between Ontario and Quebec is the education statistics and graduation rates. Now, it's pretty difficult to find apples-to-apples comparisons between high school graduation rates in Ontario and Gatineau, or Ottawa and Gatineau, I should say. But I did find some data from StatsCan for the province of Ontario versus the province of Quebec from 2016 to 2020. And you can see here that Ontario pretty reliably graduates at a higher rate than Quebec. And from what I understand, that has continued up until this point. The other thing to keep in mind is if you want your kids to be educated in English only, that might not be an option for you in Quebec. There are some exemptions for immigrants, I believe, but overall, your children are probably going to be going to French school if they come to Quebec. Now, if your kids are young, this is actually an advantage in the Ottawa area, I would say. Your kids are going to be educated in French at school and learn French through their friends' interactions. But from their interactions at home and consuming pop culture, they're also going to learn English, and that's going to make them bilingual, which I can tell you firsthand from living in both Ottawa and Gatineau in the past, makes a big difference in your career prospects. It's a great skill to have. If you have older children that only speak English, it might be more difficult for them to make the transition to French school. On the Ontario side, the baseline is that you're going to be educated in English if you're in elementary school or secondary school. But there are lots of options for French immersions depending on which area of town that you live in, so you can have your kid educated in a bilingual way in Ontario as well. Now, the last thing to mention when you're considering Ottawa versus Gatineau or Ontario versus Quebec are the cultural differences. And I'll start by saying that both cities and both provinces are very multicultural. You'll get people from all sorts of different backgrounds on both sides of the river. Where I find the real divide, the noticeable divide is if you speak English or if you speak French. Particularly if you're on the Quebec side and you only speak English or really struggle to speak French, it can be a bit of a challenge to get around depending on which part of the city you're in. Now, on the west end of Gatineau in the Elmer area, it's much more Anglo-friendly, and if you only speak English, it's pretty easy to get around there. You won't notice a huge difference other than most of the signs will be in French and the traffic lights will be sideways compared to the ones in Ontario. But if you go a little bit further east into Hull and the main part of Gatineau, you will start to encounter a little more resistance if you don't speak any French. And it's pretty rare, but you will get the occasional person who treats you like a bit of a second-class citizen if you only speak English. Again, I want to emphasize that these are exceptions. Most people on the Gatineau side will do their absolute best to communicate with you in English, and most of them can. But there is a bit of a protectionist streak on the Quebec side, and that can come out sometimes when you're just interacting day to day. Ottawa and Gatineau both have their pros and cons. The lower price of real estate in Gatineau is really tough to beat sometimes, but it's important you're aware of the other things that could impact your decision and your lifestyle once you get there. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to reach out or leave a comment. My information will be in the description below. And if you did find anything of value in this video, please consider liking and subscribing so it finds its way to more people just like yourself. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch, and have a fantastic day. Take care.